Hello and welcome to Slice of Ace. I wanted to talk about representation of asexuality in popular media. I'm going to be talking about it in general, so whilst I will mention some specific examples, I'm mainly going to be talking about why I think ace representation in media is important and what I would like to see in the future from positive representation of asexuality. And when I'm talking about popular media, I'm talking about books, films, video games, all these sorts of things. There aren't many positive representations of asexuality in media at the moment. The big one, obviously, is Todd from BoJack Horseman. I've heard that that's a very good representation. I personally haven't watched it because, in my opinion, the art style is hideous. But I do plan on looking at those scenes in particular just to educate myself about it. But apart from that, there have been little mentions of asexuality in other media, but nothing substantial. So what do I want personally from popular media? Asexuality isn't very well known by the general public. So I think what's important first is to explicitly and accurately portray asexuality. What is important for that is mentioning asexuality by name. There is one example in particular which I think is a good representation of asexuality, but they don't mention the word asexual at all. I think what I would like to see at the moment is the character coming to terms with their asexuality and finding out what asexuality means and maybe coming out to people. In the same way that positive representation of gay people in media was centered around particularly their orientation and their coming out. And I think that is more important at the moment than integrating ace characters with asexuality just being a part of them. Solely because people need to be acclimatized to the idea of asexuality and they need to understand what it means on a personal level and for people in general. And once asexuality hopefully has been established as a legitimate and a well understood orientation, then you can get onto things like it just being mentioned offhand and Bill the receptionist just happens to be asexual and it's just another part of his character but not an important part. To start, I'd like to see an asexual story centered around an asexual character about the struggles of asexuality and about coming out and about how asexuality affects your relationship with other people and your life in general, because it does. Another thing that I'd like to see from asexual representation is, particularly for aromantic aces, the viewpoint of the allosexual in an allo-ace relationship. I personally think that's interesting, and to see how someone with sexual attraction and someone without sexual attraction can have a relationship despite that, the kind of struggles and arguments and the conflict that can happen in a relationship because of that disparity between the asexual and the allosexual's sexual drive and sexual need. And that could even come in the form integrating it into my original example, where someone gets into a relationship with an allosexual and then realizes that they're asexual partway through, and when an emotional bond is already formed, there's that struggle to work it out as a couple. And what I don't want, definitely, I want to get rid of all the bad representation and the misrepresentation of asexuality that's in the media. The problem I find is that a lot of the time, people who are asexual or who have asexual traits are seen as emotionless or inhuman or at worst psychopathic. I haven't watched it personally, but Dexter in the series of the same name is originally portrayed to have asexual traits, that he doesn't want sex, that he's not interested in sex. But he's also a psychopath. And I think that's perfectly fine in theory, because asexuals, I imagine, are just as likely to be psychopaths than anyone else. That's going to be taken out of context. But before you can get to an asexual being a psychopath or a gay person being a serial killer, you have to have that positive representation so that people's misconceptions and their acephobia isn't amplified, if that makes sense. Another horrendous and very infamous example is House. There was an episode in House where asexuality was mentioned by name, but it was also disproven as a medical condition within the episode. I'm probably going to talk about this later, but it was horrible, and all it did was spread the message that asexuality is a disease, and that if you're asexual, then there is something inherently wrong about you. Finally, I think that in terms of bad representation, there is a lot of amatonormativity in popular media, which is especially harmful for people who identify as aromantic. Aromantic depictions in media, maybe even more so than asexual, are very few and far between. I don't know if I know any personally. If you do, feel free to comment them down below. But I imagine as an aromantic person, it's very frustrating when you have all these ideas of a perfect life being thrust upon you when this perfect life always includes a romantic relationship. But why is representation in media important? Popular media obviously reaches a lot of people, and especially I think the demographic that is most important for is teenagers. People who are growing up and who are learning about their sexuality and about how they feel, and as their emotions are changing, it's important to have examples which you can relate to. Characters in shows and in books and in games that you can relate to. Because if you are in an orientation or a gender identity which isn't properly and positively represented, then it can feel like there's something wrong with you, and that is something that can lead to self-hatred, and it could lead to loneliness, and it can lead to, in some extreme cases, self-harm and suicide. So by normalizing asexuality and aromanticism in popular media, it will help those people who maybe don't live in liberal areas and maybe don't have that exposure to the LGBT plus community to feel like they belong somewhere and to feel like what they experience is normal. So in conclusion, I think that popular media is a very important place to promote minority sexual orientations. What I want personally is first an asexual coming out story, whether that be as part of a bigger story as a character's specific arc, or its own, I don't know, short film or something. But I want someone to specifically find out about asexuality, it mentioned by name, and it talked about accurately, just to get that in people's minds. And then later on we can have the characters who just happen to be asexual, and maybe one day down the road we can have psychopaths that are asexual and their asexuality isn't linked to their psychopathy. But that is just my opinion. If you have something else that you'd like to see from popular media, if you think that it has no place in popular media at all, then comment down below. Also, if you have any other examples that you would like to bring to my attention, feel free to comment those down below as well. I plan to be making a series on asexual representation in popular media. I have a couple of episodes planned already, but these won't be coming out on a regular basis. So whenever I come across some representation of asexuality in popular media, I'll make a video about it, talking about that specific example, and yeah. And then I'll just do that whenever I come across something else. Hopefully more positive ones than negative ones. I've already found a couple of good ones, which I plan to talk about in the near future. Well, one of them in the near future. One I need to read a book first. And also, if that is something you're interested in, comment as well. Say, wow, I'm really excited to see this. Then I'll move that closer down the pipeline. If you enjoyed this video, then please leave a like. I post videos every Saturday, except for when I post a bonus video on Tuesdays, apparently. So if you want to see more, then feel free to subscribe. That is all I had to say today. Have a wonderful day, and I shall see you next time. I don't know why I'm twisting a thing. And that's not where the recording button is.